What's wrong?
He doesn't trust us.
Well, seeing how all clones were given an order to execute the Jedi, he has good reason to be cautious.
I'm sorry about what happened, but we are not like the other clones. We did not follow that order, and we don't work for the Empire either. What about the Trandoshans? The Empire's been using them to strip the planet's resources. Many of the villagers have fled deeper into the jungle.
What are they doing?
They're asking the trees for help.
They're talking to the trees?
They believe this planet belongs to the trees.
The trees have a plan. All right. Whatever they say.
Where does the Emperor stand on this issue, since he remains absent from these proceedings?
And what about the interests of the clone troopers? These are soldiers who defended us, defended our worlds. After all they have sacrificed, you now wish to discard them, leave them with nothing. Is that how we repay them for their service?
Allow me to assure this delegation that provisions are in place to aid the clones as they begin to be phased out. Let Senator Chuchi make her demands for the clones. Once she's appeased, the defense recruitment bill will be approved long before any of the provisions she's seeking come due.
So that's it? We serve our purpose and now they want us out?
That's why I'm here, to better understand your needs.
I need to stay a trooper. Can you make that happen?
You expect the Empire to fund a new military and full pensions for millions of clone troopers.
If that is not manageable, Admiral, then perhaps now is not the time for your recruitment bill.
Oh, I wish that were the case. But the murmurs of rising threats and insurgency are more than rumors. My priority is keeping the galaxy safe.
Rampart is skilled at saying all the right things, especially when he doesn't want anyone looking deeper. The issue of clone rights is part of a much bigger picture. These insurgencies that have arisen, their numbers are growing. And the Emperor is afraid. It's rather convenient, wouldn't you say? How a catastrophic storm destroyed the cloning facilities on Kamino, making way for the Empire's new military. Tipoca City, designed to be submersible, weathered thousands of storms over the years, yet it's suddenly wiped off the map. Follow the money. It always leaves a trail.
Tell me about the missing Senate appropriation funds that were earmarked for operations on Kamino. Funding for the cloning facilities has been siphoned off for over the past year. You had to have known.
Do you know what happens when you dig around where you shouldn't? I suspected an attack was imminent. Lama Su was arrogant, too confident his clones were a necessity to the Empire. But none of us are.
He cannot continue to get away with what he's done.
Rampart is a mere cog in the machine.
With the clone trooper provisions requested by Senator Chuchi now addressed and the matter resolved, there is no reason to delay the vote of the Imperial Defense Recruitment Bill further.
You were responsible for diverting Kaminoan funding to outside projects without Senate approval. Your actions began months prior to the loss of Tipoca City, almost as if you were preparing for it. I assert that the Kaminoan cloning facilities were intentionally eliminated.
New evidence has come to light which must be considered.
It would appear that Senator Chuchi's horrific assertions are correct. This unprovoked attack on Kamino was a cowardly act by Admiral Rampart to further his own personal agenda. Guards, arrest and detain the Admiral.
I was following orders!
Palpatine was one step ahead of us during the war, and he's still several steps ahead of us.
I don't understand. We did the right thing. We told the truth.
And he twisted it to his advantage. The fate of all the clones is now sealed. Because of us.
I sense a plot to destroy the Jedi.
Hello there.
The highest levels are involved in the conspiracy.
Nancy Pelosi is Emperor Palpatine.
We must be the great arsenal of democracy. I love democracy.
All who gain power are afraid to lose it.
Fear. Will keep the local systems in line.
Truths we cling to depend greatly on our own point of view.
Welcome to the Conspiracy in the Force podcast. Star Wars, conspiracies, and more. With your host, me, Conspiracy Kyle.
Rebellions are built on hope.
For God commanded the light to shine out of darkness.
As long as there's light, we got a chance.
This is what Luke says before he goes to the toilet.
This is Red 5. I'm going in.
Good morning. Sunday morning.
Welcome back to another episode of Conspiracy in the Force. As always, I'm your host, Conspiracy Kyle. Today's podcast will be a triple feature, breaking down content from episodes 6 through 8 of The Bad Batch Season 2. Episode 6, called Tribe, was a standalone episode about a rescue of a Wookiee Jedi. We will dedicate only a small amount of time to this episode. The main thrust of today's show is discussing the hugely conspiratorial two-part story that comprised Episode 7, The Clone Conspiracy, and Episode 8, Truth and Consequences. First, let's get into Episode 6, which was called Tribe. Now, this episode featured a rescue of a Wookiee Jedi, who Clone Wars fans may remember from a Season 5 episode of that show, who's being held by an entity called the Vanguard Axis, which was, interestingly enough, a crime syndicate comprised of only droids. So that's a pretty interesting and terrifying idea. Droids who can be programmed to carry out heinous acts with no remorse or ethical consequences. As you hear in this clip I'm about to play, these droids feel empowered to do any and everything for money, including human trafficking. Well, Wookiee trafficking in this case.
The Wookiee is worth a great deal to our buyer. Alive.
You can't smuggle living beings.
For the right price. I can do whatever I want.
As the episode goes along, the Bad Batch attempts to bring Gungi back to his tribe of Wookiees on Kashyyyk. Here we see a familiar sight to prior episodes and shows in this Dark Times era, where the Empire pillages and destroys a planet for its natural resources. In this case, the Empire has enlisted Trandoshans, those creepy reptile-looking creatures, to deforest Kashyyyk and even burn down any sacred relics the Wookiees have. As always, leave it to the lizard people to do the bidding of the elite. Anyways, the theme of Imperial destruction of planets comes back again in the next two episodes, so we'll discuss that later in regards to Kamino. Now, not only do the Trandoshans destroy the forests, they're also outright burning villages too and bulldozing the terrain with tanks. As the episode unfolds and the Wookiees fight back, we get a very Ewoks versus Empire, or even Viet Cong versus American vibe, as the local populations use their environment against the technological terrors that have come into their midst. Now, one last thing to discuss about this episode is in regards to the trees, and the symbolism of Wookiees laying their hands on the trees and asking them for wisdom, which does end up happening in this case. The visual itself lends directly to that of the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem, where people go to touch the wall and to say prayers. Every American president in recent history seems to have taken a picture doing this. As the popular history goes, the wall is part of the outer wall of the Second Temple of Jerusalem, going back to biblical times. Many people pray at it or to it, and even shove written prayers into the crevices of the wall. Now, before we get into a controversy about the wall itself, this practice does shout of idol worship. Anything that celebrates the creation over the creator, God, is making that thing itself out to be a god, with a little g. This wall doesn't have magical powers. It's not a being to be prayed to. Now on to the conspiracy. Now there are a contingent of people out there who believe that this wall is not actually part of the ancient temple structure, but a part of the Roman fortress called Fort Antonia. So in actuality, this would be an act of pagan worship to the Romans in all their ideologies, such as idol worship, persecution of Christians, and so much more. Now I haven't done a deep enough dive into the archaeology and geography surrounding this discussion, but Jesus himself did say of the temple structure in Mark 13:2, quote, "Do you see these great buildings? Not one stone will be left upon another, which will not be torn down," end quote. Now on to episode 7 with the ultra juicy title, The Clone Conspiracy. As the episode starts, the clones are showing remorse about their complicity in the Empire's destruction of Kamino, which occurred at the end of Season 2.
The entire galaxy believes Rampart's lies. Even the Senate. It's not right. Well, there's nothing we can do about it. Let it go. How can I? Kamino was our home, and we destroyed it. All those cities, all those people, gone because of what we did. We were following orders. Oh, were we? Then why is Rampart covering it up, huh? I can't stay silent any longer. We're not bad men, but what we did was wrong. Please, I need your help. Together we can...
So apparently Admiral Rampart has been blaming the planet's destruction on bad storms, which is eerily similar to the conspiracies in our world related to HARP and other man-made disasters that are blamed on the weather. His destruction of Kamino was meant to mark an end to the future creation of clones. And coupled with the fear of so-called insurgents in the galaxy, Rampart now wants to enlist a new crop of military recruits. In the legislation he's putting forth in the Senate, which is the thrust of these next 2 episodes, was aptly named the Defense Recruitment Bill. Here's a clip of the back-and-forth Senate discussion, which included talk of what would become of the clones.
While the cataclysmic storm on Kamino was tragic, the reality is that without the production of new clone troopers, we are vulnerable. Admiral Rampart's proposed Defense Recruitment Bill will keep us protected.
There are more pressing matters in the galaxy right now than the costly creation of a new military. The war is over.
Perhaps where you reside, Senator Pablo. But the mid and outer rims are rife with insurgents. We must be protected.
So a few things to unpack there. First, the discussion of insurgents. I assume we're meant to believe that these are very early cells of the rebellion popping up to combat the Empire's totalitarian regime. However, knowing what we know about Palpatine, these insurgents could also be either A, completely fictitious entities mentioned on the HoloNet news to frighten the population into action, or B, actual individuals causing havoc but doing it on the commands of Palpatine as false flags. Possibly even clones, as we see at the end of Episode 7, the assassin was a clone, a very dark clone. Based on the episodes at hand, we don't have a clear answer to this. Second, we have the real-life parallel of how to treat military veterans. This has caused for heated debate among the political parties here in the U.S. Now, I personally believe that veterans of foreign wars do not receive adequate support and medical care to the level that matches the damage that have been done to their bodies during war. The irony is that the government themselves in our country have inflicted some of this damage on the soldiers, such as Agent Orange and other pathogens that troops have had to endure, which is completely apart from any damage sustained by foreign entities. In this episode, we have a senator fighting for the rights of the veterans. Now, I'm sure in our world there are many senators that are fighting for the rights of veterans publicly, but I think we're a long way from this leading to any actual change. And some of it may just be virtue signaling. Now, interestingly enough, We do see Rampart here virtue signaling that he will work with clones' rights, but he has no intention of doing so. Now, one of my favorite quotes from this episode that really made me laugh out loud, Senator Chuchi, who's the one fighting for the clone rights, comes in contact with Slip, who had witnessed his friend's murder at the beginning of this episode, because he knew too much about what happened with Kamino. Now here's their conversation, and her response to him is so real world. We'll discuss.
Admiral Rampart can't be trusted.
Why not?
He's lied to you, to everyone. Kamino wasn't destroyed by a storm. It was an attack ordered by Rampart himself. I was there, aboard his Venator. He had us open fire on the cities.
If they were true, the Senate would know. Someone would have come forward.
Rampart made sure no one could. Clones who tried to speak up were either reassigned, went missing, or ended up dead.
And there it is. Yeah, we've all heard this one discussing conspiracies or other events that the government orchestrates with our family and friends. If that were true, I'd hear it on the news. Little do many know how manipulated the news cycle is, going back years to Project Mockingbird, then to the Telecommunications Act of '96 consolidating media power, and into the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act of 2012, which legalized centralized propaganda in the U.S. Now let's discuss Kamino again. Senator Chuchi confronts Rampart about what actually happened to Kamino and where he was.
The storm that caused the cities of Kamino to fall. How is it that you survived?
I was taking part in a training exercise off-world. If I had been present, perhaps more could have been saved. It was a tragedy.
The majority of the Kaminoan population was lost, Admiral. That is beyond tragic.
Indeed. But we must move forward.
Of course, the old training exercise. I mean, how many times have we seen or heard about military training exercises on or around the same dates and times as major false flag events? And I also like how quick he is to want to move forward and put the past behind him. Isn't that just like the powers that be in our world? Whenever they're questioned about their terrible deeds or tragedies in the past, they want to turn the page and look ahead and not answer to their crimes at all. I keep going back to the whole idea of pandemic amnesty, which was put forth in an Atlantic article, where we're supposed to just call it even and not bring anyone to justice regarding the manipulated events surrounding the pandemic and the vaccinations. So let's now move to the final episode of this podcast discussion, Episode 8, Truth and Consequences. And yes, truth does have consequences, and in this case, bad consequences. Now this episode was incredible in the fact that Palpatine moved his new empire forward even further by remaining several steps ahead of everybody, playing chess as always while everybody else is playing checkers. Palpatine uses Rampart as a useful idiot / lone gunman and pins the entire destruction of Kamino on him when it was actually authorized by the highest levels of the government. To get to that point, we have Senator Bail Organa throwing out the classic follow the money phrase in terms of funds appropriated for Kamino that were diverted for other purposes prior to the destruction of Kamino. Now, Rampart's explanation in the Senate, when he's presented of this proof, is interesting in two quotes that he states.
I am not at liberty to disclose the nature of certain military operations. The funds you are referring to were redistributed, not misappropriated.
Redistributed, not misappropriated. Interesting. Now you can see Rampart here using the 1984-esque newspeak when relabeling his fraud as redistribution, not misappropriation. It's very similar to how the press secretary for Biden considered classified documents in Biden's garage were inadvertently misplaced, whereas when the magnifying glass was on Trump around documents at his residence, he was considered to do it in a fraudulent manner. Now, I have no love for either of these, but the irony and parallel here is interesting. So Rampart is taken down before he gets to see his new military bill see the light of day. However, Palpatine jumps in and pushes it through anyways. He uses the actions of Rampart and the clones who reported to him in the Kamino genocide as a Trojan horse to usher in this new era for the Empire. Here's Palpatine's full quote in its entirety.
I am deeply troubled by this recent revelation. My gratitude to Senator Chuchi for exposing a rogue element within our ranks. Many lives have been lost, but I assure you, Admiral Rampart will face the consequences for his treachery. However, he did not act alone. The fact that the clones under his command so blindly followed orders, inflicting such carnage without hesitation, gives me pause. Perhaps it is time for a change. Now, more than ever, building a strong galaxy requires protection and security. Due to the nefarious actions of Admiral Rampart and the immediacy of the bill on the floor today, it is my opinion that this legislation is our future. With this momentous act, we shall usher in a new era, heralded by the Imperial Stormtrooper.
Now you can definitely hear shades of Palpatine's prequel speech here at the end of Revenge of the Sith, where he organized the new empire. Ironically here, he virtue signals that the clones' unquestioning obedience is a bad thing, when just a few months ago, he used this obedience to wipe out the Jedi. Funny how that works out. He also mentions that he's ushering in a new age, a new Aeon, as the occultists would say. The funny part is this new Aeon is now filled with stormtroopers instead of clone troopers, and stormtroopers have terrible aim. All kidding aside, Palpatine again masterfully orchestrates a near crisis to his advantage. He's growing stronger and stronger in the dark side as the balance shifts towards darkness. As Rex states after the fact, Palpatine twisted the noble actions of the Bad Batch to present evidence of Rampart's crimes into a way for Rampart's legislation to still pass, and his regime gets no flack, as Rampart's crimes were just the work of one man, a lone wolf acting on his own selfish desires. Now you can draw a parallel here to how Christians are treated in this fallen world that we live in. Professing Christians that are attempting to follow God's rules in His design, while they are trying to do what's right in God's eyes, oftentimes they have their actions subverted by those who would want to undermine Christianity. For example, God's original design for marriage is between one man and one woman. But when you say that out loud, voila, all of a sudden, you're viewed as homophobic and you hate gay people. When you state that the man is to be the head of the household and to lead his family, boom, you're viewed as sexist and anti-woman. And even crazy enough, when you're bold enough to make the outrageous claim that God created only two genders, male and female, all of a sudden you're the worst transphobe and must be shunned from society. It's all part of this world of inversion we live in. Right is wrong and up is down. But in the end, God will set everything right. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Conspiracy in the Force. I'll talk to you again next week. Until then, may the Force be with you, and God bless. God bless.